Religions pursue different directions towards modernism, many of them based on local traditions and resources. So whereas conventional world strategies would focus on what I call the proximate drivers that directly influence demographics and the economy and technology and governance, great transition strategies invite us to go to the ultimate drivers that shape society and the human experience: values, knowledge, power, and culture. And where proximate drivers might be responsive to near-term interventions, the ultimate drivers are subject to gradual political and cultural processes that can expand the frontier of what's possible by changing the basis of human choice. So looked at slightly differently, in market forces, it would maintain the correlation between a sense of well-being, the level of material consumption, and throughput, the flow of resources through an economy. Now, policy reform would decouple consumption from throughput through better technology, a dematerialization wedge, while great transitions would add a lifestyle wedge. But after a satisfactory standard of living for all, it would break the link between the sense of well-being and consumption. And with regard to poverty, market forces, the gap between rich and poor persists. And at the bottom of the economic pyramid, 1 billion people remain mired in absolute poverty. A policy reform would seek to bring up the bottom through targeted programs to alleviate poverty, while great transitions is rooted in building more equitable social relations. Now, a great transition would actually be comprised of a myriad of sub-transitions across every aspect of culture. So a values transition would challenge consumerism and individualism, the domination of nature. A knowledge transition would emphasize systemic approaches. A demographic transition would stabilize populations and start to build sustainable communities. A social transition would ensure universal rights and eradicate poverty. An economic transition would make the economy a way of serving people and sparing the environment. A governance transition would build partnerships among stakeholders at all levels in some kind of a nested governance system. A technology transition would certainly include deep efficiency, renewable resources, and industrial ecology. But who will change the world? What social actors could carry forward such a program? Well, there's no easy answers. It would certainly involve a myriad of actors, north and south, east and west. But let's look at 4 major agents of change. 3 are global actors: intergovernmental organizations, civil society, and the private sector. But will intergovernmental organizations be able to reinvent themselves and overcome the fragmentation of national geopolitics to become a true civil service? Will business enterprises be redesigned so that social purposes is at the center of their mission? Will civil society overcome its fragmentation and confrontational culture to become more unified around a common vision and principles? Well, the answer ultimately depends on the 4th group, the quality of awareness and engagement of the citizens of the world. We found it impossible to tell a compelling story of a great transition without positing the formation of a global citizens movement for one. And the situation is somewhat urgent. Now, I've been talking in very simplistic terms about pure case scenarios of market forces and eco-communalism, and fortress world. Well, in fact, as you know, the world is a complicated place of mixed tendencies, some more dominant than others. In our global scenario group, we've told stories about many different futures, depending on events and choices and activities. It's fairly easy, I think, to tell a compelling story about a fortress world. I mean, for example, the forces for a great transition and policy reform remain weak. Market forces leads to some kind of a crisis, and out of that comes the consolidation of an authoritarian fortress world solution. It's much harder to tell a story of a great transition. It's much harder for us. And we hope that's our problem and not the world's problem. But we gave it a shot, and if you ever look at the essay, you'll see a chapter on history of the future, a whimsical attempt to tell the history of the Great Transition from the year 2068. But the key factor is the rise in energy and importance of the forces for great transition, which pushes the policy reform agenda, and which allows for a different kind of outcome before there is a crisis. The key lesson of all this, the headline, even though we're talking about 2068, the critical thing is what happens in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of changing the mix of tendencies so that the response to various crises that may come along will be more felicitous than it might otherwise be. So we return to a simple question, the one we began with. Which world do we want? The first wave of sustainable development centered on better technology, poverty alleviation, and incremental changes to market-driven globalization. Now we need a second wave that brings human values, lifestyles, and institutions to the center of debate and research and action. So we need a new global vision that is at once legitimate, coherent, inspiring, and rigorous. And we need that so that we can challenge conventional thinking and inspire people to seize the public imagination, as well as broaden the political base for change. And we need to get started. So there's a continuing role for scientists to make the case, for the media to raise public awareness, for corporations and trade unions to spearhead a transformation in the private sector, for parliamentarians to carry it into policy, and for educators to lay the more enduring foundations. But I think the linchpin is civil society. To the degree it remains fragmented and reactive, then I think the basis for hope shrinks. But the degree to which it can unify around a common vision and principles and framework, then I think a movement for a sustainable future will have found its natural voice. So sustainability is kind of, the way I look at it, it's kind of the necessity that pushes a great transition, while the vision of a better life is a magnet that pulls it forward. But to get there, the curve of development has to be bent twice. That a radical revision of technological means can begin the transition, but a reconsideration of human ends is needed to complete it. And that is the promise and lure of the global future. Okay, thanks.